They weren't just trucks. They were raw, untamed monsters built to dominate the road, and sometimes the law. Packed with engines too big, horsepower too wild, or designs too strange, these pickups crossed the line from bold to banned. Most people never saw them. The ones who did never forgot. Here are 12 banned American pickups that were just too powerful, too crazy, and too dangerous for America to handle. The 1974 International Harvester Project Tornado is one of those hidden, half-forgotten stories that feels too wild to be true. The moment when a company best known for tractors, grain trucks, and farm equipment tried to build a street racer that could humble Detroit's proudest muscle cars. It was a brief, strange experiment driven by a few restless engineers who wanted to see what would happen if they took the brand's biggest, meanest truck engine, the 392 cubic inch V8, and stuffed it into a short bed pickup, then paired it with brutally low drag strip gearing. And the answer, it turned out, was something both ridiculous and amazing. The 392 wasn't a delicate, high-strung performance engine. It was a brute built to haul logs up steep hills and push snowplows through blizzards. But when the engineers opened up its breathing and tuning for higher RPMs, it unleashed a wave of torque so fierce that it could overwhelm the rear tires almost instantly. Test drivers described it as comical and terrifying in equal measure, a plain, square-edged pickup that could launch like a cannonball from stoplights, leaving Camaros, Roadrunners, and Mustangs in disbelief at the taillights of a machine usually seen on dusty farms and construction sites. With drag gearing, the truck was quick off the line, very quick, but the fun ended there. The short, heavy chassis wasn't built to handle the power. Test drivers reported that it wandered and shuddered at speed, and the leaf-sprung rear axle would skip sideways under hard throttle, making the truck a handful to keep pointed straight. Add in a Spartan interior and heavy manual steering, and what you got was a barely controlled rocket, a machine that did one thing incredibly well, launch hard, and almost nothing else. Yet the strangest part of the story isn't how fast it was, it's how completely out of character it was for International Harvester. This was a brand that built tractors, scouts for backwoods trails, and square-jawed work trucks for county road crews. Their customers prized durability, simplicity, and slow, unstoppable torque. A short dead pickup tuned to roast muscle cars at red lights was about as far from the brand's image as you could get. And that, more than anything, is why the project quietly disappeared. Lawyers worried about liability, marketing teams couldn't figure out how to sell a farm-bred drag racer, and the accountants saw only headaches. In the end, IH executives decided it was best not to poke the sleeping bear of insurance companies and safety regulators. Project Tornado was quietly canceled, the test mules dismantled or reassigned to other duties, and no mention of it ever made it to brochures or showrooms. All that's left is a rumor that once upon a time, the tractor company built a street racer so fierce it embarrassed Detroit's finest, and then got so scared with what it created that it buried the idea before it could see the light of day. It's a reminder that sometimes even the most conservative brands have wild, fleeting moments of rebellion. But those moments don't always survive the boardroom. The 1967 Ford Bronco pickup 427 tunnel port prototype is one of those stories that sounds like it must be a rumor passed around at late-night car mates. Yet it's rooted in a real moment of unfiltered Detroit madness, a time when the desire for raw, tire-smoking power could override common sense, at least for a brief, beautiful moment. Picture the original first-generation Bronco, a small, honest, no-nonsense half-cab pickup designed to bounce through muddy fields and pick its way up rocky trails. Its short wheelbase, simple suspension, and lightweight construction made it agile off-road, but it was never meant to be fast. It was a farmhand, a hunter's rig, a backwoods explorer, not a speed demon. And then, Ford's engineers, driven by the spirit of the 60s horsepower wars and a dose of pure insanity, asked themselves, what if we put a full-on NASCAR engine into it? And not just any big block, but the savage, high-revving 427 tunnel port V8. This was the same engine that terrorized ovals with its massive ports and oversized valves, built to breathe at insane RPM and spit out torque and horsepower numbers that still make enthusiasts' hearts race today. It was a brute force motor, famously temperamental and notoriously hard to tame even in a purpose-built race car. Stuffing it into the Bronco was an act of mechanical rebellion. The engine barely fit under the hood, the headers wound around like angry pythons, and every spare inch of the engine bay was consumed by iron and heat. The moment the prototype fired up, it must have sounded like a war drum echoing off factory walls, an off-road truck idling with the menace of a NASCAR stalker. But driving it, that was a different story altogether. Imagine tapping the gas and feeling the whole front end of this little truck trying to leap skyward. The Bronco's famously short wheelbase, meant to help it pivot around rocks and trees, became a curse on pavement. The weight and torque of the big block turned every stoplight launch into a hair-raising wheel stand. Keeping it pointed straight was a constant battle, as torque steer pulled at the steering wheel, and with every squeeze of the throttle, the front wheels felt like air. The handling? Forget it. The extra weight of that iron V8 perched over the front axle wrecked the Bronco's balance, turning corners into wrestling matches. The suspension, designed for crawling over boulders, not sprinting down drag strips, bounced and bucked under the stress. And the heat? That big 427 belched out enough warmth to make the cabin feel like an oven. The radiator couldn't keep up. Temperatures spiked within minutes, making it unsuitable for anything longer than a sprint around the block. Yet for a few fleeting moments, it was magic. A tiny, rugged truck built to haul hay and hunting gear now roared with the fury of a NASCAR racer. It didn't just go fast. It blurred the line between off-road curiosity and unstoppable drag strip beast. But that magic came wrapped in pure danger. Even in an era when safety standards were laughably loose by modern terms, Ford's own engineers and legal teams looked at what they'd created and realized they might have gone too far. A high center of gravity vehicle, short wheelbase, race engine, and massive torque, it was a lawsuit on 4 wheels waiting to happen. In the end, the project was quietly buried. The prototype was stripped and dismantled, and all mentions of it faded into the background noise of Ford's archives. It never saw the light of a showroom, and Ford's PR team never even teased it to the public. And yet the legend survived. Whispered stories among test drivers and engineers about the Bronco so powerful it could pull a wheelies, so hot it could boil itself dry before lunch, and so wild that even the Anything Goes 60s wouldn't dare to put it on sale. What makes this story stick decades later is what it says about the spirit of that time. It was an era when American car makers built things because they could, when horsepower was the answer, even if no one had asked the question. The Bronco 427 tunnel port prototype wasn't practical, sensible, or remotely safe, but for a few months it existed. And just knowing that somewhere in Dearborn, someone had the nerve to bolt a NASCAR heart into a compact pickup makes you smile. Too short, too light, too insane, even for a decade famous for its excesses. But that's exactly why it still captures the imagination. For that one brief moment, Ford built something nobody asked for, and it was magnificent in its madness. A ghost of a truck that shouldn't have worked, didn't last, but proved that sometimes the wildest ideas make the best stories. And in car culture, sometimes the legend of what almost was burns brighter than anything that ever rolled off the assembly line. The 1983 Chevrolet El Camino SS A-coupe prototype is one of those wonderfully strange what-if stories in American automotive history. A story so unlikely and yet so oddly perfect that it still sparks grins and headshakes from car enthusiasts who stumble across its ghost in old design sketches and whispered lore. It was a moment when Chevrolet engineers, riding high from their NASCAR success with the Monte Carlo A-coupe, dared to imagine the most unconventional idea of all. What if they took that same slippery, race-bred roofline and grafted it onto the ultimate parts hauler and mullet-era icon, the El Camino? Picture it. The early 1980s, When American automakers were trying to hang on to performance credibility in a market shrinking under emissions rules, rising insurance costs, and shifting tastes. The Monte Carlo A-coupe, with its distinctive sloped rear window and redesigned deck, had just been approved to homologate the shape for NASCAR's superspeedways, where every ounce of drag reduction mattered. It worked, giving race teams a crucial aerodynamic advantage. And then, somewhere in GM's back rooms, a few creative engineers looked over at the El Camino and thought, why not here too? What rolled out as the prototype wasn't just a mild refresh, it was a full visual shock. A car-truck hybrid that now wore the swept-back fast glass look of a Daytona or Superbird. Instead of the traditional squared-off cab and open bed, the A-coupe El Camino had a sloping rear window that flowed into a raised bed cover, blurring the line between a muscle car and a NASCAR homologation special. From the rear three-quarter view, it almost looked like something dreamed up in a Hot Wheels design meeting. Outrageous, sleek, and somehow functional. Under the hood, the plan was to give the A-coupe real muscle to match the look. An SS package meant a stronger small block V8, upgraded suspension, and performance gearing, turning the parts runner into something that could actually hustle. Imagine it in the mid-'80s, pulling up to a stoplight in what looked like a custom NASCAR support vehicle, then barking the rear tires and leaving ordinary sedans behind in a cloud of burnt rubber and V8 growl. But the very thing that made it special was also what doomed it. The sharply sloped glass played havoc with rearward visibility, turning lane changes into faith-based maneuvers. Defrosting the large curved pane in winter was an engineering puzzle nobody wanted to solve. And most critically, the bed, now partially covered to create the fastback look, lost a chunk of its utility, defeating what buyers actually loved about the El Camino in the first place. Then came the hard numbers. Tooling up a special roof and glass design for a low-volume vehicle wasn't cheap, and the accountants saw little hope of recouping the costs. GM executives, already fighting to keep the El Camino in the shrinking car-truck niche, didn't see how adding NASCAR-style aero would win over buyers who mostly wanted to haul lumber, motorcycles, or parts. And so, despite its boldness, the A-coupe quietly died before it ever reached a showroom. But in that short flash of existence, it embodied something so wonderfully American. The urge to see just how far you can push a weird idea, to cross the wires between practicality and racing bravado, and to create a machine that makes absolutely no sense on paper, but feels irresistible in the imagination. Just picture it. Heading to the hardware store in a car-truck hybrid that from behind looks like it could pull into pit road at Talladega, or loading up a bed full of car parts and knowing your pickup shares aero DNA with actual stock cars. It was part hot rod, part race car, part work truck, and all glorious contradiction. Today, the 1983 Chevrolet El Camino SS A-coupe prototype survives mostly as a whispered rumor and a few grainy photos. But for those who love the quirky corners of muscle car history, it stands as proof that even in the cautious, cost-cutting 80s, Detroit still had a spark of mad creativity left. A willingness to ask, what if your daily parts runner had the aerodynamics of a NASCAR champion? And though the answer was probably not practical, the dream itself was beautiful while it lasted. The 1979 Dodge Warlock II is one of those lost pages in muscle truck history that almost reads like a ghost story from the tail end of Detroit's wild decade, a time when car makers were still trying to squeeze every last ounce of rebellion and style out of increasingly regulated engines and shrinking windows of opportunity. It was meant to be the next evolution of Dodge's famously outrageous adult toys line, following the Lil Red Express truck that had somehow slipped past emissions loopholes to become the fastest American production vehicle of 1978. But where the Lil Red had tall chrome stacks and unapologetic hot rod swagger, the Warlock II was set to push the envelope even further, turning the volume up just as the rest of the industry was turning it down. At its heart, the Warlock II was built around the idea of attitude as a factory option. Dodge's plan was to equip it with an even rowdier small-block V8 tuned to deliver real punch in an era when horsepower numbers had dropped like stones. They planned to pair it with drag-style gearing for that signature off-the-line snap and wrap it all in a package dripping with gold accents, hand-painted pinstripes, and custom-look touches straight from the dealer. The side pipes weren't for show either. They were functional, adding a bark and crackle that could make bystanders whip their heads around before they even saw the truck coming. The design leaned heavily into the fantasy of the custom truck scene, a chopped-down, short-bed pickup that looked more at home cruising Main Street on Saturday night than hauling anything practical. The Warlock name itself hinted at a mischievous, almost magical character, and the II promised it would be bigger, badder, and louder than the original. Buyers weren't just getting a truck, they were buying a statement, the kind of vehicle that made you grin when you fired it up and made neighbors either shake their heads or nod approvingly. But just as the idea was taking shape, reality crashed through the party. Insurance companies had already been tightening the screws on anything that even hinted at performance, and the Lil Red Express had already painted a target on Dodge's back. Emissions regulations for 1979 and beyond were getting stricter, and the loophole that let the Lil Red use a high-output engine was rapidly closing. Engineers found themselves fighting to keep the truck's projected power figures alive while still passing smog tests and losing ground with each new draft of federal rules. Then came the accountants and product planners asking hard questions. Could a flashy V8-powered short-bed pickup really sell enough units to justify its costs, especially with rising fuel prices and stricter emissions compliance on the horizon? Marketing teams worried the custom truck market that had been red hot just a few years earlier might not be enough to save it. And even if it did, the insurance premiums would scare away many buyers before they ever set foot in a dealership. In the end, the Warlock II never officially launched. The handful of prototypes and mock-ups that were built were quietly scrapped or absorbed back into Dodge's test fleets, and the project was mothballed before the public ever got to hear its side pipes rumble down the street. The nameplate faded, and Dodge shifted focus toward more conventional offerings as the 1980s arrived. Yet, in that short moment when it was on the drawing board, the Warlock II captured something special, the last embers of Detroit's rebellious spirit, just before they were smothered by regulations, market realities, and rising fuel prices. It was a truck built not to tow, haul, or plow, but to turn heads, make noise, and thumb its nose at convention. And even though it never rolled off the assembly line, the idea itself that a major automaker once seriously planned to sell a factory-built street rod with side pipes and gold pinstripes is a testament to how wonderfully weird and fearless that era could be. Too much attitude, not enough approval. Maybe that's why we still remember it. The Warlock II remains a phantom muscle truck, a symbol of what could have been if the party had just lasted a little bit longer. The 1972 Jeep J4000 Super Dauntless concept stands as a fascinating and wild chapter in the annals of American automotive history, one that almost seems like a fevered dream from a bygone era of unrestrained experimentation and raw mechanical ambition. It emerged during a period when American automakers were still testing the limits of power and practicality, often without fully grasping the potential consequences of their creations. Jeep, a brand synonymous with rugged utility and off-road prowess, had recently come under the ownership of AMC, American Motors Corporation, which was eager to expand its portfolio and stake a claim in the burgeoning market for powerful trucks and SUVs. The Super Dauntless was their answer. A vehicle that combined brute force, off-road capability, and a hint of reckless bravado in a package that was as imposing as it was controversial. The heart of this beast was the legendary AMC 401 cubic inch V8 engine, a big block powerhouse known for its prodigious torque and muscular performance. In its factory tune, the 401 delivered approximately 330 pound-feet of torque, enough to make it a serious contender in any truck or muscle car arena. But for the Super Dauntless, engineers didn't just stop at the stock figures. They pushed the engine further, tuning it to unleash even more raw power, aiming to create a pickup that could out-accelerate many muscle cars of the era while also conquering the toughest off-road terrain. The idea was intoxicating. Marry the torque-heavy 401 with Jeep's durable, rugged chassis, then raise the whole package on heavy-duty suspension and oversized off-road tires that screamed capability. Internally, the Super Dauntless prototype must have been the kind of vehicle that test drivers both loved and feared. The engine's deep, guttural roar, combined with the sheer physical presence of a lifted, aggressive-looking truck, would command attention wherever it went. But beneath the surface, that combination of towering ride height, heavy torque, and less-than-modern suspension geometry spelled trouble. Reports from test runs tell a story of a truck that was thrilling to drive in a straight line, but unsettlingly unpredictable when pushed in corners or on loose surfaces. The elevated center of gravity meant the Super Dauntless leaned hard into turns, and with the 401's torque abruptly applied, the rear end could easily break traction and snap sideways. While that kind of power sliding might have thrilled some muscle car fans, in a tall, heavy truck, it was a recipe for disaster. The turning point, and the project's ultimate demise, came during a high-speed test session. As the prototype was pushed to its limits on a winding course, it suffered a rollover accident. Fortunately, the drivers escaped major injuries, but the crash sent a loud and unmistakable message to AMC management. Here was a truck that, for all its power and capability, was simply too dangerous to bring to market. With increasing scrutiny from insurance companies and tightening federal safety regulations looming on the horizon, AMC executives had little choice but to shut down the Super Dauntless program. The prototypes were dismantled, and the project was quietly buried in company archives, effectively erased from the public eye. Despite its abrupt end, the legend of the Jeep J4000 Super Dauntless persists among enthusiasts and historians. It symbolizes the peak of a time when American automakers could, and sometimes did, push engineering limits to their breaking point. The truck remains a tantalizing what-if in automotive lore. What if AMC had managed to tame this wild beast and put it into production? Could the Super Dauntless have carved out a niche as a pioneering performance off-roader, predating the muscle SUVs that dominate today's market? Or would it have been remembered as a dangerous, ill-conceived experiment that nearly cost its drivers their lives? Looking back with decades of hindsight, the Super Dauntless is more than just a curiosity. It embodies the spirit of a wilder, less restrained era when power was king and engineers dared to dream big, sometimes too big. It stands as a reminder that innovation often walks a razor's edge between brilliance and catastrophe. For those lucky enough to glimpse its story, the Super Dauntless remains a symbol of raw ambition, untamed power, and the eternal human desire to push the limits, sometimes to the breaking point. It's a pickup that roared, teetered, rolled, and then disappeared into the shadows, leaving only whispers and the haunting question, what might have been if only the road had been a little straighter and the risks a little less daunting? The 1965 Chevrolet C10 ZL1 prototype represents one of the most fascinating and extreme chapters in the history of American muscle vehicles, a story of ambition, engineering audacity, and ultimately caution that changed the course of muscle truck development forever. To fully appreciate this rare beast, it helps to picture the context and the sheer madness behind the project. The Chevrolet C10 was, at its core, a hard-working, no-nonsense, light-duty pickup truck built primarily for practicality. It was a staple on farms, construction sites, and small towns across America, a dependable workhorse designed for hauling, towing, and enduring daily wear and tear. It wasn't designed to thrill the senses or win races. It was about utility and toughness. But somewhere in GM's hidden testing labs, engineers saw the C10 as a potential wild card, a blank canvas for something extraordinary. Enter the ZL1 engine, one of the most advanced and powerful small-block V8s of its era. Originally developed for Chevrolet's racing efforts, particularly Can-Am and Trans Am, the ZL1 was an all-aluminum 427 cubic inch powerhouse that pushed the limits of performance engineering. Unlike traditional cast-iron engines, its aluminum block and cylinder heads drastically reduced weight without sacrificing strength, allowing for incredibly high revving capabilities and raw horsepower that could exceed 430 HP stock, numbers that far outpaced anything typically found in pickup trucks at the time. The thought process was tantalizingly simple but outrageously bold. Why not pair the lightweight race-bred ZL1 with the rugged, reliable C10 chassis and create a muscle truck unlike anything else on the road? The potential was staggering, a pickup that could not only haul loads, but also leave sports cars in the dust at the drag strip. It was a chance to blend brute strength with speed, utility with exhilaration. But the reality of such an endeavor soon became painfully clear. The C10's frame and suspension, designed for everyday hauling and farm work, were not engineered to handle the violent torque and explosive power that the ZL1 produced. Early tests revealed catastrophic weaknesses. Rear axles snapped under the load, drive shafts failed suddenly, and the frame experienced dangerous stress points that threatened structural integrity. The cooling system struggled to manage the engine's heat output in the pickup's cramped engine bay, and the chassis handling became wildly unpredictable, turning the truck into a beast that demanded respect and skill to control. It wasn't just a powerful truck, it was a raw, barely controllable rocket with farm truck roots. Despite the obvious thrill and the undeniable performance potential, GM executives and legal teams swiftly intervened. The looming threat of liability lawsuits, insurance nightmares, and the complex challenge of marketing such a niche and dangerous vehicle pushed the company to bury the project. The prototype was quietly destroyed, all documentation was sealed, and the ZL1 C10 faded into automotive obscurity. The decision to kill the program marked a crossroads between wild innovation and corporate caution, a moment when the dream of an ultra-high performance muscle truck was sacrificed to practicality and safety concerns. Yet, for enthusiasts and historians, the story of the 1965 Chevrolet C10 ZL1 remains a powerful symbol of what might have been, a glimpse into an alternate muscle car universe where raw racing technology met everyday utility in a way no one expected. Even decades later, the legend stirs imaginations. The image of a rugged Chevy pickup, its hood bulging with the iconic aluminum ZL1, its tires burning rubber as it tears down a rural highway, combining the soul of a workhorse with the heart of a race car. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes engineering dreams push beyond the edges of safety and convention, creating machines that exist forever as whispers in the history of automotive rebellion. In the end, the 1965 Chevrolet C10 ZL1 is not just a forgotten prototype. It is a testament to the boldness of an era that dared to imagine muscle in every form, and a reminder that beneath even the most utilitarian exteriors, the spirit of speed and power can roar to life, even if only for a fleeting moment. The 1984 Dodge Rampage Turbo Shelby prototype is one of those rare, intriguing footnotes in the history of American performance vehicles, an almost forgotten attempt to inject some serious fun and speed into a segment where excitement was traditionally scarce. It came at a time when the muscle car era had all but vanished, replaced by cautious engineering, rising fuel prices, and increasingly strict emissions regulations. The traditional American pickup truck, revered for its utility and toughness, was not exactly known for handling prowess or thrilling acceleration, especially in the front-wheel drive compact segment where the Dodge Rampage resided. Yet somewhere within Dodge's and Shelby's engineering departments, a spark of creativity and ambition ignited a project to defy those expectations and craft a small truck that could surprise even the most jaded enthusiasts. The base Rampage was a compact pickup built on the Chrysler L platform, itself derived from the Dodge Omni hatchback. It wasn't designed for speed or excitement, more for economy and practicality. It featured a front-engine, front-wheel drive layout that prioritized cargo space and fuel efficiency over performance. But Shelby, renowned for his legendary Cobra and Mustang tuning programs, saw potential where others saw only a humble econo truck. His team engineered a turbocharged version of the Rampage, equipping it with a high-output 2.2-liter turbocharged inline-4 engine, beefed-up suspension components, and upgraded brakes. The result was a surprisingly quick, nimble, and engaging little pickup, with more zip off the line and better road manners than anyone expected from a truck that looked more at home hauling lawnmowers than tearing up asphalt. Internally, this prototype must have felt like a breath of fresh air for engineers stuck in an era of risk aversion. It was a machine that dared to blur the line between practical utility and outright fun, combining Shelby's performance DNA with Dodge's quirky compact pickup in a way few anticipated. Drivers who got behind the wheel reportedly found it lively and responsive, a bit of an urban street rocket disguised as a truck. It had the potential to carve out a unique niche in the market, sporty enough to excite young drivers and practical enough to serve everyday needs. However, the 1984 Dodge Rampage Turbo Shelby was a classic case of being ahead of its time, and also hindered by the era's harsh realities. Emissions regulations, insurance companies, and corporate risk managers all weighed heavily against bringing such an unconventional performance vehicle to market. Turbocharged engines were still under scrutiny for reliability and emissions compliance, and the idea of marketing a turbocharged compact pickup as a performance truck was a tough sell to cautious executives. Liability concerns were particularly acute. A lively little truck with increased power and less than traditional handling dynamics raised red flags for insurers who feared increased accident risks. These factors, combined with the limited market appeal of such a niche vehicle, ultimately doomed the project. Moreover, the early 1980s American automotive landscape wasn't quite ready for a performance pickup that played with turbocharging and front-wheel drive in a compact format. The muscle truck era of the 1970s was fading, and consumers gravitated toward larger, more comfortable vehicles or small economy cars, leaving little room for experimentation. Dodge, already juggling multiple priorities and restructuring its lineup, decided to scrap the project quietly, melting down prototypes and shelving all plans. Yet the story of the Dodge Rampage Turbo Shelby prototype continues to fascinate gearheads and historians alike. It's a tantalizing glimpse at what might have been, a truck that challenged conventions, merging Shelby's race-bred expertise with Dodge's everyday vehicle into a unique performance machine. It's fun to imagine pulling up to a stoplight in one of these, looking like a modest little pickup, but with a turbocharged engine ready to roar, surprising every muscle car and hot hatch in the neighborhood. Looking back, the Rampage Turbo Shelby could have paved the way for today's burgeoning segment of performance trucks and sporty crossovers, well ahead of its time. It might have sparked a culture of tuning and customizing compact trucks long before the rise of sporty pickups and small SUVs. Instead, it remains a ghost of ambition, a reminder that sometimes the best ideas don't survive the constraints of their era, but leave behind a legacy that sparks imagination decades later. In essence, the 1984 Dodge Rampage Turbo Shelby prototype embodies the eternal tension in the automotive world between bold innovation and commercial caution. It was a project born from a desire to push boundaries, to defy expectations, and to inject excitement into an unlikely platform. Though it never made it past the prototype stage, its spirit lives on in the dreams of enthusiasts who believe that performance and practicality can coexist even in a humble little pickup. The 1991 Chevrolet 454 SS Stage 2 Dealers Specials occupy a fascinating and almost mythical place in the annals of American muscle truck history, a hidden saga of rebellion, excess, and the unstoppable human desire to push machines beyond their official limits. The original 454 SS, introduced by Chevrolet in the late 1980s, was already an unapologetic powerhouse. A full-size pickup truck equipped with the gargantuan 7.4-liter or 454 cubic inch V8 engine that pumped out raw muscle, delivering thunderous torque and a commanding presence on the road. It was Chevy's bold statement that even as fuel economy and emissions regulations tightened, there was still room for a truck that roared like a muscle car and could haul with authority. But for a select few dealers and performance enthusiasts, the stock 454 SS wasn't nearly enough. The factory version was fierce, no doubt, but the craving for more power, more aggressive throttle response, and even more brutal acceleration led to an underground movement, an unofficial Stage 2 upgrade program that never came from GM's official engineering teams, but rather from a handful of creative and determined Chevrolet dealers who saw an opportunity to ignite a performance revolution in their own showrooms. These dealers, operating on the fringes of corporate oversight, began modifying the trucks with aftermarket and sometimes factory-sourced high-performance parts that went well beyond the original specifications. They installed aggressive camshafts designed for higher valve lift and longer duration, upgraded cylinder heads with improved airflow, larger carburetors or upgraded fuel injection components, and reworked exhaust systems that allowed the 454's thunderous engine to breathe easier and roar louder. The result was a beastly truck, with increased horsepower and torque figures that made the factory 454 SS look almost tame by comparison. The Stage 2 trucks could launch off the line with brutal force, pulling hard in every gear and make a dramatic statement at every stoplight. Word of these dealer specials spread quickly in muscle truck circles. Enthusiasts and collectors began seeking out these rare, dealer-tuned machines as hidden gems, vehicles that blurred the lines between factory muscle and full-on hot rod. Their existence sparked excitement and admiration and even envy among those who longed for a muscle truck that didn't just look the part, but could truly perform like a thoroughbred race machine disguised in a rugged work truck's body. However, this surge of creativity and raw power came at a price. The modifications often pushed the trucks beyond legal limits for emissions and safety compliance. The upgrades violated increasingly strict government regulations designed to curb pollution and improve vehicle safety, a reflection of a changing automotive landscape that demanded manufacturers and dealers adhere to tight controls. Chevrolet's corporate legal and emissions compliance teams quickly caught wind of these unofficial modifications and their growing popularity. Faced with the risk of legal action, potential recalls, and damage to the brand's reputation, GM moved decisively to shut down the rogue Stage 2 programs. Dealers were ordered to cease all unauthorized upgrades, and many of the modified trucks were either pulled from sale or returned to factory specifications. Records and documentation were quietly scrubbed or sealed to avoid drawing public or regulatory attention. The Stage 2 trucks, once whispered about in backrooms and enthusiast clubs, became an almost secret legend. Rare survivors and stories of wild muscle trucks that were too hot for the showroom floor and too powerful for the street. Looking back, the 1991 Chevrolet 454 SS Stage 2 dealer specials are a symbol of a transitional era in American automotive culture. They embody the tension between the muscle car spirit of unrestrained power and the realities of an evolving regulatory environment that increasingly prioritized emissions, safety, and consumer protection over raw performance. They represent the eternal conflict between innovation and control, passion and prudence. For fans and historians today, the Stage 2 trucks remain a fascinating reminder of what happens when unfiltered enthusiasm meets the constraints of modern industry. They are the hidden, rebellious chapters of muscle truck history. Vehicles that could have changed the game but were forced back into the shadows. Their legacy lives on in the imagination of those who dream of pure horsepower and the roaring freedom of American muscle, even as the world moved toward quieter, more efficient machines. In essence, the 1991 Chevrolet 454 SS Stage 2 dealer specials are more than just upgraded pickups. They are icons of defiance and ambition. They remind us that even in a time of tightening rules and rising caution, there are always those who dare to push the boundaries, building machines that roar louder, go faster, and challenge what's possible, if only for a brief, unforgettable moment. The 1968 Ford Ranchero 428 Cobra Jet prototype is one of those rare, almost mythical footnotes in the annals of American muscle history. An audacious experiment that dared to blend the brute force of one of Ford's most legendary engines with the unique practicality of a car-based pickup. At a glance, the idea seems revolutionary. Take the Ranchero, a vehicle that combined the everyday usability of a pickup bed with the style and handling of a mid-sized car, and equip it with the monstrous 428 Cobra Jet V8, a big block powerhouse that was already famed for its ferocious torque and muscle car prowess in vehicles like the Mustang and Torino. But as history would reveal, the marriage of this heavy, torquey engine with the Ranchero chassis was a volatile combination that spelled trouble from the start. The 428 Cobra Jet was no ordinary engine. It was designed for raw, unfiltered power. Ford engineers created it to dominate the muscle car scene with its 7.0-liter displacement, high-flow cylinder heads, and aggressive camshaft profile, delivering upwards of 335 horsepower and even more torque. In bigger, heavier muscle cars, this engine was a legend, capable of blistering acceleration and a signature thunderous growl that made enthusiasts' hearts race. But as transplanting this engine into the relatively lighter and more nimble Ranchero chassis fundamentally altered the truck's dynamics in ways Ford had not fully anticipated. From the moment the prototype was built and tested, the Ranchero's front end sagged under the weight of the 428. The additional mass over the front axle dramatically shifted the truck's center of gravity forward, creating a nose-heavy vehicle that was prone to understeer and traction issues, especially under hard acceleration or cornering. Drivers quickly realized that this setup made handling unpredictable. The Ranchero could unexpectedly break loose at the front wheels, resulting in sudden skids or oversteer that made it challenging and dangerous to control its speed. On wet or uneven roads, the problem was even more pronounced, turning what was supposed to be a muscle-packed utility vehicle into a potential hazard. Despite the thrilling promise of combining utility and muscle car performance, Ford's management had to face cold, hard facts. The risk of accidents caused by the prototype's unstable handling was simply too great, especially as public safety standards tightened and insurance companies grew more wary of high-powered street vehicles. The idea of selling such a truck to the general public, many of whom might lack the experience to handle a tail-happy, front-heavy beast, became a liability no marketing campaign or engineering fix could overcome in time. Consequently, the Ranchero 428 Cobra Jet prototype was abruptly killed. The tooling for any convertible or pickup adaptation with this engine was dismantled, and every prototype was either dismantled or quietly melted down. The entire program was effectively erased from Ford's official history, leaving only tantalizing hints and whispered stories among enthusiasts and muscle car historians. Yet the legacy of the 1968 Ranchero 428 Cobra Jet prototype lives on as a potent symbol of the tension between ambition and practicality in the muscle car era. It reminds us that raw horsepower alone cannot make a great vehicle. It must be balanced with handling, safety, and thoughtful engineering. It also highlights a period when automakers were still pushing boundaries, sometimes recklessly, in pursuit of performance glory. Willing to risk danger and controversy to try something bold and new. Today, this lost prototype fuels imaginations. What if Ford had figured out how to tame that nose-heavy beast? Could the Ranchero have become the first, truly fast muscle car pickup, combining daily utility with track-worthy power? Or was it destined to remain a lesson in limits, a cautionary tale about the dangers of mismatching extreme engine power with chassis designs not built to contain it? For muscle car fans and historians, the Ranchero 428 Cobra Jet prototype remains a fascinating what-if, a glimpse into a path not taken, and a reminder of an era when American automakers dared to dream big, sometimes paying the price when those dreams outran reality. The 1978 Dodge Lil Red Express truck is truly one of the most extraordinary and rebellious chapters in American automotive history. A vehicle that perfectly captured the last sparks of the muscle car era while simultaneously rewriting what a pickup truck could be. At a time when the muscle car heyday was fading under the weight of rising emissions regulations, soaring insurance costs, and shifting consumer tastes, Dodge boldly defied the trend and delivered a factory-built performance truck that thundered down the street with the soul of a drag racer and the presence of a snarling beast. The Lil Red Express was far from an ordinary pickup. Underneath its fiery red paint and distinctive black hood stripes lurked a ferocious 360 cubic inch V8 engine derived from Dodge's Police Interceptor program. Unlike the majority of trucks from the late 70s, which were lumbering, slow, and gas-guzzling, this engine was specially tuned to deliver maximum performance. Rated at around 225 horsepower, a remarkable figure for the era, especially without catalytic converters, the 360 V8 was equipped with aggressive camshafts, a higher flow intake manifold, and headers that fed those massive, signature vertical exhaust stacks rising dramatically behind the cab. The sound alone was enough to make hearts race. A deep, guttural roar that announced the Lil Red Express was no ordinary truck, but a rolling thunderstorm. In terms of performance, the Lil Red Express was a revelation. It could sprint from 0 to 60 in just over 7 seconds and cover the quarter mile in the low 15-second range, making it one of the fastest American vehicles available in 1978, faster even than many contemporary muscle cars that had lost their edge. This was a truck that could smoke Camaros and Firebirds off the line, a vehicle that blurred the lines between brute utility and pure, unfiltered performance. The presence of those towering side pipes, functional and fierce, made it clear this was not a vehicle designed for quiet suburbia. It was a rolling rebellion on wheels, loud and proud. Yet the Lil Red Express wasn't just about raw speed. It was about attitude, style, and defiance. Its aggressive graphics, bold colors, and aggressive stance set it apart on the road, making it instantly recognizable and impossible to ignore. Dodge marketed it as a statement truck, a symbol of power for those who wanted to break away from the norm and embrace something uniquely American. For many enthusiasts, it represented the last hurrah of an era where muscle wasn't just confined to coupes and convertibles, but could be found roaring from the bed of a pickup truck. However, the truck's unabashed performance came with a significant cost. Dodge made the controversial decision to omit catalytic converters, a primary emissions control device that was rapidly becoming mandatory to preserve power and maintain the thunderous exhaust note. This choice quickly drew the ire of regulators and environmental groups as the U.S. government tightened emissions standards in the late 70s and early 80s. The Lil Red Express became a target, emblematic of a bygone era where performance often trumped environmental concerns. By 1980, under increasing regulatory pressure, Dodge was forced to end production of the Lil Red Express. Its run was short but impactful, cementing the truck's status as a collector's gem and a symbol of resistance against the era's tightening automotive restrictions. The truck's rarity, combined with its unique blend of muscle car heart and pickup utility, has only increased its mystique and desirability among collectors and enthusiasts worldwide. Today, the Lil Red Express stands as a fiery testament to a time when American automakers still dared to push boundaries, crafting vehicles that roared louder, ran faster, and made a bold statement on the road. It's a rolling icon of rebellion, power, and personality, A reminder that even in an era of growing regulation and change, there was still room for a truck that defied expectations and earned its place in the pantheon of muscle legends. Driving past one on the street, hearing that thunderous exhaust, it's impossible not to feel a surge of excitement and respect for a true outlaw of the muscle era. The 1990 GMC Syclone is one of those rare and unforgettable moments in automotive history when an automaker looked at a category everyone thought they understood, a compact pickup truck, and decided to turn it completely upside down. On the surface, it was little more than a blacked-out version of the humble GMC Sonoma, with subtle styling cues and an unassuming stance that might barely catch your eye in traffic. But under the hood and behind the badge lurked something that defied every expectation. A turbocharged, intercooled 4.3-liter V6 engine mated to a full-time all-wheel drive system, an unlikely recipe that turned this small truck into a genuine street-legal rocket ship. It wasn't just quick for a truck. The Syclone could launch from 0 to 60 miles an hour in about 4.3 seconds, faster than a Ferrari 348 of the same era, and quick enough to embarrass most American muscle cars without breaking a sweat. Thanks to its advanced AWD system, it could hook up and blast off from a dead stop in nearly any conditions. Rain, cold pavement, it didn't matter. While most pickups rattled and shuddered under power, the Syclone planted itself, squatted, and surged forward with relentless turbo-fed force. It felt less like driving a truck and more like firing a missile. Inside, the experience was just as strange. You sat in what looked like a fairly ordinary compact pickup interior, modest seats, simple gauges, straightforward switchgear, but the moment you buried your right foot, the illusion shattered. Boost built instantly, and the V6 unleashed a deep, aggressive snarl as it hurled you toward the horizon. It was raw, brutal, and completely addictive, a visceral reminder that this was no ordinary machine. But this sort of performance came at a cost, not just financially, but socially and legally. Insurance companies didn't know what to do with a pickup that could outrun supercars. Rates skyrocketed almost overnight. GM's legal team worried about customers who might lose control or underestimate the truck's ferocity. And emissions and safety regulations were tightening, making it harder to justify building something so extreme. Faced with the potential of lawsuits, bad publicity, and a limited market willing to pay a premium, GM chose caution over glory. Production was quietly capped at around 2,995 units, and after a single model year, the Syclone disappeared from showrooms as suddenly as it had arrived. And yet the legend only grew. Enthusiasts still marveled that a manufacturer actually built it, a compact pickup that could out-accelerate a Corvette with technology borrowed from the Buick GNX and race-bred turbo wizardry. It asked a question few had dared. What if a pickup wasn't about payload or towing, but about pure speed and shock value? Could a truck be a sports car in disguise? And does it even make sense to call something that fast, that focused, and that wild a truck at all? More than 30 years later, the Syclone remains an icon because it made people question what a truck could be, and because no one has truly built anything quite like it since. It wasn't practical, it wasn't cheap, and it wasn't built for hauling lumber, but it made the impossible real. A pickup that could leave Ferraris blinking at the stoplight, all while looking like it had just come off the construction site. If you saw one today, rolling quietly through traffic with its blacked-out body and subtle badging, you might not look twice, until the light turned green and it vanished into the distance with a rush of boost and a streak of turbocharged fury. Is a pickup still a pickup if it can launch like a supercar? Or is it something rarer still? A rolling legend that broke the mold and left its mark, impossible to copy and unforgettable to those lucky enough to witness its brief, glorious run. The 1971 Ford F-100 429 Super Cobra jet with drag pack is one of those rare, fascinating footnotes in muscle truck history. An unassuming workhorse on the outside, but a tire-shredding monster under the hood. Imagine a plain, rugged Ford pickup truck built for hauling and hard labor, quietly transformed into a brutal performance machine by the addition of Ford's legendary 429 Super Cobra jet SCJ V8 engine, one of the most fearsome big blocks ever produced. This wasn't just an engine swap, it was a deliberate attempt to create a muscle truck that could not only haul heavy loads, but also beat some of the most iconic muscle cars of the era in a straight-line drag race. The 429 SCJ itself was a powerhouse, a 7.0-liter V8 that packed an incredible amount of torque and horsepower, especially when paired with the optional drag pack. This drag pack was designed for maximum straight-line speed and durability on the strip. It included a close ratio rear axle with a higher numerical gear ratio to help the truck launch harder off the line, a heavy-duty oil cooler to protect the engine from overheating under the stress of repeated hard launches, and strengthened suspension components to cope with the additional strain. Put together, these elements transform the everyday F-100 into a muscle truck with explosive acceleration and surprising agility for its size. When you think about a work truck, images of slow, lumbering vehicles often come to mind, but this F-100 was anything but slow. With the 429 SCJ and drag pack, it had the power to not just keep up with, but actually outrun contemporary muscle car legends like the Ford Mustang Boss 302 and Boss 429, as well as competitors from Chevrolet and Dodge. The truck could launch off the line with ferocity, delivering thunderous torque that would rip the tires loose and send it rocketing forward with terrifying speed. It was a blend of brute force and precision engineering that caught many muscle car enthusiasts by surprise. However, despite the thrilling performance potential, Ford's corporate leadership grew concerned about the risks. The early 1970s were a period of rising insurance costs, tightening safety regulations, and growing public wariness of dangerously powerful street vehicles. Offering a pickup truck that could literally out-drag some of the fastest muscle cars on the road raised serious liability issues. What if someone lost control? What if insurance companies refused to cover it? What if lawsuits piled up? These fears led to the swift cancellation of the drag pack option on the F-100 with the 429 SCJ, and the handful of trucks already equipped with this combo became rare collector's items. Driving one of these trucks required not just courage, but skill. The immense torque from the 429 SCJ could overwhelm the front tires, causing severe torque steer, a violent pulling sensation that made steering a challenge under hard acceleration. The chassis, designed for hauling rather than speed, was pushed to its limits, demanding respect from any driver brave enough to handle it. It was not a tame daily driver, but a wild, raw muscle machine disguised as a farm tool. Today, the 1971 Ford F-100 429 Super Cobra Jet drag pack prototype stands as a fascinating what could have been in muscle car and truck lore. It symbolizes a time when automakers flirted with extreme performance in unexpected packages, daring to put the heart of a muscle car inside a humble pickup truck. It also serves as a reminder of the tension between raw horsepower and regulatory caution, how sometimes even the most thrilling machines must be shelves because they simply push the envelope too far. For collectors, enthusiasts, and historians, this truck is more than just a rare model. It's a legend of American automotive audacity. It challenges the conventional image of muscle vehicles, proving that the spirit of performance isn't limited to coupes or sedans, but can roar from behind the wheel of a pickup truck. Owning one of these machines today is a glimpse into a rebellious past when power was king, and engineers dreamed of building trucks that could outrun anything on the street, even the fastest Mustangs. Would you dare to throw your foot down and unleash the fury of a truck built to beat muscle cars? It's a question that continues to excite imaginations and fuel the legacy of the 1971 Ford F-100 429 Super Cobra Jet Drag Pack, a tire-burning, heart-pounding icon of raw American muscle.